sitting today. So yeah, welcome everyone. Let's get started. So first thing to say is I have absolutely no plan for this, and that is part of the point. I am viewing this series of live videos as a kind of radical experiment in creativity, philosophical creativity. So, I mean, I have some goals in mind. I would like to talk about how someone would even start building a philosophy from nothing, right? What does that even mean? And Taylin and I will go back and forth on what that means. I have a lot to say about that. Maybe I'll say a few things about why I'm here and what led to this thought. And Taylin, I'll have you also say a bit about why you're interested in this as well. I wrote a note the other day on Substack. I was working in a cafe doing some personal philosophical research, and I just had this idea of building a philosophy in public because I was starting to uncover what I took to be a new philosophy that I wanted to build. So I was just thinking, well, I don't know where this is going to go. Why don't I just do it online and get people to help me and participate in the process? I never thought about that seriously before, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like a cool thing to do. And the more it seemed like uh, maybe an antidote to so much of what people struggle with in philosophy, which is feeling like they're not doing things correctly or feeling like they need to have certain credentials before they're allowed to say certain things. So, I have a PhD in philosophy from an Ivy League university, and, it is what it is. I have all sorts of insecurities about my own intellectual abilities and whatnot. So, I thought it would be really great to just be vulnerable online with this whole process instead of just doing it alone in the cafe by myself and sharing the finished product. So that was some of the motivation for why I decided to host this event. Taylin, I'm curious if um, you had anything to say about that, or if you wanted to share a bit about how you have approached your own worldview construction, philosophy construction.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me. First off, when you messaged and asked if I wanted to be a part of this first one, it really was such an honor after chatting with you so much about this. Like, really, I was like, I'm so stoked. This is like the most fun I could have all week.
Oh, wow. Great.
Yeah, I was buzzing. So, quick backstory on me. I'm a writer and I used to be a college teacher. But over the past probably 2 years, I started a project in private that I called my Worldview Construction Project. And I broke my worldview down into spiritual, material, practical, consciousness, personal philosophy, just things like that. And I thought I was kind of crazy. I was like, I just want to pull apart, like, what do I know? When I go to write about something, I want to make sure that I've thought it through. And I have no idea how I even landed on the idea to do this, but it just became something that I did in private and didn't think anyone would ever care about in public. So I would just work on it on the side in the evenings, and keep it in a second brain. And then it wasn't until you and I hopped on a call and you were like, "Oh, I got this micro philosophy thing and I'm helping people construct a worldview." And I was like, "Wait, people are doing this in public? Like this is so freaking cool." I've been like kind of wild westing it, doing it in this like kind of half-ass way on my own. And then the more I talked with you, the more excited I got about these types of projects and being able to see that there's a community of people who are thinking similar about constructing worldviews, figuring out what are the beliefs that I inherited, what ideas are controlling me in my life. As I think it was Carl Jung who said, people don't have ideas, ideas have people.
Nice. Yeah.
And
Yeah, he has a
yeah,
couple quotes like that, which are all great. Yeah, so look, we have 47 people here who are interested in this, right? And obviously, in my community, there are a ton of people who have started doing this already through the micro philosophy framework I set up. Um, and I figured, well, let me do it myself. Like, let me model this for people as well. How would I start to build this? I had this great insight. Like, how can I combine existentialism and non-dual philosophy? Like, I really think
mhm,
few people have tried to do that. Well, let me do it. Like, let me actually start from scratch and try to do it. Before we get started, I was curious about what you think about this analogy between what we're trying to do here and music, because I know you have a music background. And I was thinking about the way people study music and approach playing music, right? Typically, people um, have this approach where, I'm going to learn a little bit about guitar music theory and a little bit about the scales and whatnot, but like ultimately I want to play the guitar, and they might try to eventually record a song, right? And it might be like a basic punk rock song or something, right, using power chords. But people approach music as something they should do, and that's part of the fun of it, right? So I was thinking it's kind of strange that philosophy is kind of like people who study just music theory and never actually
Mm.
feel like they are worthy enough to like record their own song. I was curious what you think about this, I guess, disanalogy between how people view like the practical nature of music and philosophy as this sort of like purely theoretical thing.
It's a really cool analogy. I'd never made that connection until you brought it up. But I actually went to music school. So I learned to become a music producer, learn the theory and all of that. And then I got hired at an independent record label in my early 20s. And I started working with musicians who did not go to school. They did not know music theory. They were not classically trained, but they just knew how to play piano and guitar and instruments. And the thing that was very striking for me was that the people who were self taught actually could run circles around all the people that were like classically or traditionally taught. Not like always, but they were just so good at intuitively writing music. They would just sit there like, oh, I just hear this or I just feel this beat, and then they just start like riffing like bow no 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 no, and they just go with it, right? And you're just like, oh, then maybe this and maybe this, and it was like the act of creation. There was no like intellectual thinking quite in the same way of, well, if I use this chord, then I have to go to this chord, and then I have to go here. They were just like, nah, I just feel that it should go here. And I found that those people created, on average, what I found to be the best music. The stuff that I'm like, damn, I'm so jealous. Like, how did you even come up with that? It's like, well, you wouldn't come up with that if you were just following formulas, as good as those can be. So I think the analogy sticks. And now I'm thinking about how it might relate to philosophy. Like, to throw it back at you, how do you find, what's the difference between people who are like studying philosophy intellectually versus practicing philosophy experientially?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in this because I'm someone who always struggled to be original as a philosopher. When I was an undergrad, I was doing a major in philosophy, but I remember constantly trying to come up with my own ideas, and I just felt like I couldn't do it on my own. I had to figure out what did this guy say first, right? And in the same way someone with music might um try to master like John Coltrane solos before they improvise, right? That was me. Like, I was the person who felt like I just couldn't be creative. I couldn't, maybe it was because of self-doubt, and like imposter syndrome and all these things, but I felt like I needed to master philosophy first, and then maybe I could have my own thoughts. What I realized was that never ended up really happening. I just became kind of an expert scholar of philosophy, and I never really did the playing of the music myself. And I also noticed that a lot of other academic philosophers, they would produce like research that was original, but a lot of it was, within a conversation that was already kind of pre-established, right? They weren't like you just going on walks and kind of figuring out their worldview without, these constraints. So, I think in academia, it's very restricting. There are, of course, people who can do both, like people who, the same with music theory, right? They might know all of the music theory and they can improvise and they have very creative, original music, right? But that's super rare. And I think that, um, when people who want to play music or want to think for themselves philosophically are always looking to those people as the standard, it can be really discouraging and, make people believe that they don't have anything to contribute or to say, right? So I think, and when it comes to philosophy, it's really bad. It's like the worst version of the music scenario. because people just think, I'm not a genius. What do I have to say about metaphysics? What are my thoughts while I'm on a walk? Like what do they really count for, right? I should just go read Plato or go get a degree, right? So I think it's pretty bad in philosophy, and I've been a victim of that, which is why, this is me just going in the complete opposite direction. And I am afraid to do this, honestly, and I think most academics would be afraid to reveal their thought process on the internet, right? Instead of just like write a book and hide behind it. So yeah, this is kind of like an experiment to just try to get all that junk out of my system and create.
Dude, I love it. I have a million questions, but
Yeah, go
want to see
ahead.
where. Okay, I'll just start riffing on them then. Um, this whole thing that you're talking about how you're like afraid to put yourself out there, it's like uncomfortable. I one of the conversations we had, I said, I never shared the worldview construction thing in public because I thought, who am I to ever try to construct a worldview? Like, who am I to tackle this big philosophy thing? I'm just going to get roasted on the internet. Since you're someone who comes from the academic background and now you're moving into the more decentralized education, helping people construct a worldview, I just want to see what thoughts you have around that. Like, what authority does a person have to construct a worldview?
Yeah, I think a lot of people first off share your concern, and I also shared it, even though I was trained as an academic, because even though you have a degree and you've developed some expertise, you are kind of hyper aware of your lack of originality because you're comparing yourself to these great philosophers. Um, so I think, what authority do you have? Well, first of all, like, you are a unique perspective on the world, right? You have a unique set of experiences that no one else can ever experience. I think most people would agree, unless there's some weird thing that could happen with skulls or something, I don't know. But
Yeah.
right, unless we can like live someone else's life in the future. But yeah, your authority comes from your perspective uh, on the world, which again is completely unique. And you are doing philosophy partially to understand things for yourself, right? It's not necessarily to justify yourself to everyone else, right? It's to reach a certain deeper self knowledge, the ability to articulate this perspective. So, I mean, one question would be like, do you even need authority? Like, authority for what?
Mm.
Right? Is my goal here to convert people to my worldview? Not necessarily, right? It's you put it on the internet because it helps you approach the thinking in a different kind of way. It helps you learn from others and share with others. So, I don't think you need authority to construct your own worldview. Now, of course, you don't want to just get things like wildly wrong, right? Like people are afraid of getting things completely wrong and kind of just being confused forever. And of course, you don't want to like be this crazy person who's saying things that don't make any sense, of course. Uh,
Yeah.
right, but that's a different
Yeah.
kind of problem than the problem of like who am I to have philosophical ideas, right? That's I don't think people need permission to do philosophy. That's the simplest way to put it.
Was there a moment when you realized maybe I could actually try to construct a worldview from the ground up? Like, when did you come to that realization that this was something that was worth pursuing?
Well, I mean, that happened when I started writing online, but more recently, this experience I had the other day was a genuine experience where I felt like I have discovered a new philosophy that no one else has ever written before. So that was the most recent experience with this, right? Where it's like I actually have discovered something to say that no one else has said before, and I think it's worth saying. Um, but even then, I don't think you need to say something original for it to be worth saying. I think the original insight for me was that people's perspectives are worth articulating, whether or not they are they have already been said in some form by others, right? Why should we, if you again think about philosophy like art, like why should you not produce art if it's part of a genre where people have already made, EDM? Like, well, maybe the way you make EDM will be slightly different, right? It's already an
Mhm.
established genre. There's already um, really great, EDM artists and whatnot. But of course, like the whole fun of it is to figure out what your unique voice is and what your music sounds like. So I guess I realize that philosophy can be personal in this sort of way, where it's not so much about only saying something if it will like advance like the objective human knowledge of the universe or something, but saying things because you are articulating your personal perspective and kind of developing that unique sound almost like you're a band, right? You're developing your sound and your perspective through that process. So, once I realized that philosophy can be like that, I feel like it just allowed for this whole thing to take off, right? Where people can just do this instead of waiting or, waiting for permission or credentials or the academics to bless their research dissertation project or something. Yeah. Yeah,
This reminds me
does that make
of
sense? Like, the analogy to, like, producing, like, your own sound and music?
100%. There's so many parallels. Like even in marketing, my mentors would say, when marketing, you don't ever or you very rarely want to reinvent the wheel. You want to be 10% different. Even 5% different is enough. And sometimes when I'm constructing my worldview and then I show it to people, people will say, okay, like I've seen this, I've seen this, I've seen this, but this is something I've never heard said like this before. This was a little interesting. And it's not like the whole worldview is this revolutionary new thing. It's not. But there's like sometimes just little nuggets of framings that will someone will be like, oh, that's different. I never thought of it that way. And it reminds me of what you said to me on our first call, where you're like, well, maybe your thinking already arrives at like Plato or Aristotle or Nietzsche, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't think it through for yourself. Like why? Like I feel like that's an objection or something that I hear from the philosophy community is like, oh, that's just like Kierkegaard. It's like, so should I just stop practicing philosophy then because it's Kierkegaard and I should just read Kierkegaard, or should I keep like exploring it for myself? Like, what am I even supposed to do with that pushback? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's actually was my original thought for starting this call was this objection, because I think there is a fundamental objection you will get from academics about this whole idea that you can create your own philosophy, right? Like, is
Mhm.
that possible? What does that even mean? I think the standard view on that is to create your own philosophy, it has to be something no one else has said before. But I actually think that's like a kind of myth that academics tell themselves, right? I actually think most research and work in philosophy is not like that. It's not like this completely original thing. Of course, like these brilliant philosophers who come every, 50, 100 years might have an idea that's completely original, right? A concept or something. But um, even great philosophers are still influenced by what came before and they are remixing it in different ways. And, they don't realize the influence that the tradition has had on them. That's what the scholars afterwards, research and so on. So, anyways, I think there is an objection, which is like at some level, what you're saying has already been said, right? But that's really a narrow way to look at it. That's kind of only looking at the conclusion, but it's ignoring all of the details that you mentioned, all of the nuance, right? That's like saying that people should not make another rock song because it's just like it has the verse chorus rock structure and that's already been done before. Well, it's like actually the reason people listen to music is because they like the particular sound of this person's voice or the themes that their lyrics touch on, which resonate with people who grew up in a similar background, right? So I think it's the same for philosophy, where it's like when you really look at what philosophy actually is, it's more like music than these people want to admit. right? There's all these Buddhist philosophers who write hundreds of books on Buddhism. Like, why should we read one Buddhist philosopher as opposed to another? Aren't they all just Buddhism? It's like, no, like people like the way Alan Watts explains it versus, right, someone else. So I guess my response would be like, you know, is that objection coming from an accurate view of what philosophy really is or not? Or is it some sort of like gatekeeping, idealized idea of what philosophy is?
The where my mind goes is, so I've been thinking through, like, what even is philosophy since we talked about it, because it's like, is philosophy a way of life? Like, is it a product? Is it a process? And it seems to me like people are like, philosophy is kind of like a finished product. Here's all the great thinkers, and here's how they think, and this is already done. When I talk to you, the two things that come up for me are maybe philosophy can be viewed as more of a process of discovery, of testing, refining. And then there's a third piece, which is packaging. How do you personally package that philosophy? How do you say it? What metaphors, what analogies, what personal experiences, what reasons do you bring to existing philosophies? And it sounds like that's what people are doing when they're writing different books on Buddhism. So I want to see what you think about, is philosophy like a product, a process? Is it about packaging? Is it a combination of these three things? Like, how does that sit with you?
I mean, I think that's a good way of putting it, in my opinion. I think there's a real scholarly disagreement about this. I think there is a view of what philosophy is, which comes from like academic research, which views it as a sort of product, or it's a process which is supposed to produce knowledge. And it's good if it produces like true theories that advance on the old theories. Like this is just like, the physics kind of model. Like if someone came up with their own theory of physics that just like ignored Newton and Einstein, right? People would think they're crazy and just some like random guy doing physics, right? But that's only if you think about like the point of physics as adding to the objective kind of progression of knowledge, right? So, philosophy is obviously very different and it means different things to different people. If it's understood as a way of life and as something that you can personally benefit from doing, then like who cares if that process for you adds something to what the great philosopher said or not, right? Who cares if it produces a book that will change the academic discussion, right? So I think for me, I've been really leaning into philosophy as something that is supposed to benefit people. That
Mhm.
is that is one way of reading the entire tradition of ancient philosophy. There's a scholar called Pierre Hadot. He's one of my favorite interpreters of Greek philosophy. He argues that philosophy in the ancient world was really aimed at transforming the soul. It's not
Mhm.
aimed at simply producing theories, right? The point of producing theories was to shift people's perspective on reality and to transform their soul and to give their life meaning and purpose and so on, to make them virtuous and whatnot. So, understood that way, there's a sort of practical point to philosophy, which is to transform you in some way.
Mhm.
And, if something transforms you in a good way, but it's already been done before or said before, or the academics don't care about it, then like I would just say, who cares? Like this benefited you, right? What's wrong with that? Why would that not count as philosophy? So, I think the standard view is that it should be a sort of product, but for most people, that's not gonna really benefit them pursuing it that way. But there's a whole nother way you can pursue it, which can actually make a huge difference in your life by helping you ask the right questions, right? Articulate your beliefs, build self confidence, right? Realize that your perspective matters to yourself first and to others. So, yeah, that's how I'm thinking about it. Yeah.
We've been circling this a little bit, but like, at the core, like, why do you believe someone should actually take the time to develop their own personal philosophy or micro philosophy?
I mean, the short answer is, look at what happens if you don't, right? I think if you don't take any time in your entire life to do that, you're going to end up having external belief systems just guide your life for you. And, that can turn out fine. Like if you're in a country that's has good ideas in it, you know, I mean, that can turn out well for you, or it could turn out very badly for you. So the first thing is like your personal agency and freedom, I think. And this goes back really to Socrates' original idea of philosophy as caring for one's soul, right? Why do you study philosophy for Socrates? It's not because he thought philosophy would give you the theoretical knowledge, right? He didn't think he had any of that, right? Plato's the one who thought philosophy could give us this theoretical knowledge of the universe. Socrates, you can read him as kind of an existentialist. Like the point of philosophy is to live a certain kind of life where you are vigilant about protecting your personal ethics, the things that enter your soul, right? And making sure that you're not getting bad ideas into your soul that are going to cause you to waste your life or to become evil and unjust. So, I think it's very personal, the answer to that question, right? We want to first
Mhm.
and foremost be accountable to ourselves and responsible for our own beliefs. And if we don't take that seriously, I mean, I think history has shown that there are many people who are trying to influence you, right? And if you don't kind of build up your self defense and your critical thinking, it's very likely that you will be influenced by whoever it is that, you're exposed to.
The word self-defense in there is really powerful. This I don't mean for this to be a loaded question, because it's quite a big one. But earlier when you were saying that you want to have good ideas, impact and influence your soul opposed to bad ones, what is the difference between a good and a bad idea? Like that's that's big.
Well, I mean, here's the trick that the philosopher can appeal to. You need to study
Yeah.
philosophy to you need to study philosophy to answer that question, right? No, but it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, you could be, and I have people in my micro philosophy course. Some of them are here, and by the way, I'm sorry that we're not following the chat. I see a lot of cool stuff in there, but I just am like way too in my head to read the chat right now. Um, there are people in my micro philosophy community who were raised in radical religious backgrounds, right? And eventually they found their way out of that. And in hindsight, they're very glad that they did, right? So, what are good or bad ideas? I mean, one standard is just thinking about like whether ideas are harming you as a person, right? Like, how is your life actually going? Are you happy with the beliefs you have right now? Like, are they serving
Mhm.
you? Is your life going well? Or do you feel frustrated internally, right? So I think there's maybe a subjective standard. Now, of course, that's not, fully reliable, of course. But I think we have like a pretty good intuition about whether certain ideas are like really serving us or not. Now, of course, you can develop your own philosophy to sort of figure out which ideas are good or bad. And at some point, I think you ultimately have to settle on, a personal ethics or morality and figure out what it means for something to be good or bad. So, yeah, to answer the question, it's a hard one, but I think you need to do philosophy to figure that out. You're not going to get the answer from science. Like, scientists are not going to tell you anything about what's good or bad. They do not trade in value judgments, right? They trade in descriptions and explanations. So, where is it going to come from? It could come from religion, but of course, you need to also decide which religion, what's your relationship to religion? How does it shape your personal ethics? Are you just going to follow everything it says, or are you going to kind of interpret it your own way? So at some point, I think it comes down to the individual to develop a kind of critical stance from which they can make reasonable judgments about whether ideas are actually good for them or not.
Okay, my brain is going 100 miles a minute here, and I've read the chat and caught up on it. I'll be like the moderator here. Um, Paul Watts, he keeps bringing up this idea of philosophy or ontologies are stabilization mechanics. And I'm wondering what your take is on that. I've never heard this term before. I'm kind of assuming that I think I know what he's talking about, but maybe it's something you can speak to.
Yeah, I've never heard the term. I would guess that it means that ontologies kind of give you a stable lens through which to make sense of the kind of flux of sense experience or something. I don't know what you thought it meant.
I was kind of taking it as like the is ought problem. Like we need like a reason to do things. Like there needs to be meaning to the things that we're trying to do, and without that meaning, life just gets very unstable. Like why do anything? That was like one way that I took it, but this isn't language that I've never heard before.
Yeah, I mean, we could just go with that. I think it is interesting. There are people who I've talked to who have said that they've lived most of their lives without thinking much about philosophy at all. And I'm interested in
Mm,
this idea that someone could have a sort of stable life without even being aware of like what their worldview is that's giving them the stability. So,
mhm,
one thing about worldviews, which is cool, is that you don't have to be aware that you have one. You can have a worldview that is kind of giving you structure without you realizing it, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, is it possible to think about someone who doesn't have a stable worldview at all, right? I think such a person we would view as, in serious like psychological chaos. Like we would most likely think, this person is mad. They've like lost a grip on reality, right?
mhm,
So I think for most of us, whether we know what it is or not, there is a structure underlying our like day-to-day lives, and philosophy can help you unearth what that is and name it and understand that it's contingent, like you could change the ontology or whatever. But if you had no ontology, yes, I think you would be completely destabilized. You wouldn't It'd be like floating through space, like you don't have any sense of up or down. This is actually how Nietzsche describes nihilism, right? It's just this aimlessness, right? What would you do? Like you would lose your agency completely. How does that
mhm.
sound?
It sits with me, and there's a tension now that is brought up. Is I heard you say there's some people who they go through their entire lives never really thinking about philosophy, and they're stable and they have a firmly structured worldview, and it seems to work for them. And then there's other people where it's like, okay, that person just blindly believed what they were told and never pulled on their beliefs, and look at where they ended up. There seems to be a tension now because we're saying, well, you probably should construct your own worldview. You should develop a micro philosophy. But then I'm also hearing for some people, like their life just kind of works. How do you deal with that tension?
Yeah, I mean, their life works according to what perspective, I guess, their life works. I mean, there are gonna be people who
Mhm,
benefit from the society that they're born in. And, I think that the more you benefit kind of naturally from the worldview that you're born into, the less likely it is that you're gonna question it, in my opinion. Or like if you were just like
mm,
from
yeah,
birth, just like, at the top of society, all of like your personality aligned with what your society rewarded and so on. Like, why would you I actually know someone like this? They're very successful, and I view their whole existence as a challenge. The challenge you just articulated. It's a challenge to my whole project, right? It's like, why should we
yeah,
almost cause problems for ourselves? Why should we question, right? Well, it's easy for that guy to not question things because he's enjoying all of the benefits with none of the struggles that most people deal with, right? But
yeah,
that was just like by pure luck
mhm,
for the most part. Um, so yeah, would I want to be that guy? No, I wouldn't because I think he's missing something as well, right? I think he's missing that there are deeper truths and questions he's never even considered, right? And they would disturb his sort of status quo. So ultimately, do you care about the truth more than like the comfort or benefits that you received. And if you do, then this will be important to you. If you don't care about the truth, then I don't think it makes sense for you to question your worldview. Yeah.
Okay, this resonates with me so much because I've often wondered why I've even cared about constructing a worldview. But in my early 20s, I almost claimed bankruptcy because I was so broke and I was overweight, couldn't get a girlfriend. I was living with 4 roommates. I literally had a piece of plywood halfway across a room, and I shared a room with somebody else. So every time he would like bring women home, I was like basically in the room on the other side of a piece of plywood. You can just imagine what that was like. And there was one night I came home from work and I actually cried myself to sleep. And I said, if this is what the rest of my life is going to be, I think I'd rather just die now. And it was like after that, that really low moment that I was like, okay, are other people happy? Do other people have lives that they actually want? Yes. Who are those people? What do they believe? What are they doing differently than me? And this moment was like the seed for me to start questioning my own worldview and being like, maybe I'm not right about everything. Maybe the things that I've been taught are not actually getting me to my goals and the things that I want to achieve. But it wasn't until I hit that rock bottom moment that I started to like pull apart the ideas in my head. So I want to see how that kind of lands with you. It sounds like that's what you're saying. People like that tend to
Yeah.
question and embrace philosophy more
Yeah.
naturally.
Yeah, this is good. And also it connects to something in the chat from Kent about the Buddha, which is really interesting, right? Why did the Buddha go leave the palace? Well, the Buddha eventually saw reality, right? These people who
Hmm.
think that they are that they have no that philosophy has nothing to give them, they have no need to question, right? These are people who will eventually have to see reality. It will come to them at some point, usually in the form of death, right? Like no one is going to avoid death. So no matter what you have, right, death is a given and you're going to have to face reality at some point. So yeah, maybe the idea here is that, there are people who live in sort of isolation or comfort that insulates them from these existential problems. But then there are other people who have a piece of plywood separating a piece of plywood separating them from their roommate, right? So, you
Yeah.
know, maybe the answer is that, right, reality will come for everyone in some form or other. And do you wanna be the sort of person who is not prepared, right? Who is put off facing it for most of your life? And then it comes at the end of your life and, you're not you realize like, wow, you've really avoided, um, these existential facts that everyone has to grapple with. So, yeah, I mean, personally, and this is just my take, I think people who think that they've got it all figured out and are, like, benefiting from society are really not in touch with reality. This man who I know who's very successful, he is very narcissistic. He thinks that like he can't understand why other people struggle. Like why do you struggle with anxiety? Like life's so good, everything's great. I really think that his um narcissism and self-absorption in his own success has alienated him from understanding others. So,
Hmm.
there's all sorts of things that go wrong when people avoid philosophy, when they avoid the realities of existence. Um, but yeah, this goes back to this whole question. Like, if someone just lived their whole life and died without ever becoming aware of any of this, like, would that have been a good life? This ignorant sort of life? Maybe. I mean, in some sense, yes, materially, whatever, socially. But I think the people who would judge that something was missing from those lives are the very people who want to study philosophy, or the people who want to build a worldview, right? Because they see that there's more to life than just all that.
It also sounds like you're saying the cost. How do I word this? So like you're the narcissistic friend of yours. or the guy you know, right now life is good, but if he had a major life event that just shook him up completely, he might not even have the tools to handle it once his life is shook because he hasn't really like thought it through, built a personal philosophy. Sure, his tools work for the life he has now, but what about volatility or disorder that has he has not had to cope with in his life yet? And maybe there's a cost to not thinking through this stuff because when that happens, you could end up in a really rough place.
Yeah, I think that's right, and when he talks about people he knows who are struggling with these problems and have anxiety, it's very clear to me that he just doesn't get it. So his self-assurance that life is good, life is kind of fundamentally easy if you live the way I live and do the things I do, right? His self-confidence that his life is great and there are not all these problems. These philosophers are kind of making up problems. That has really put a barrier between him and other people because when they have problems, he can't even wrap his head around it. And he might not even realize, like, if life comes at him, he might just kind of be in denial of it completely. He might not even realize that there are real problems there, right? Because he's blinded himself to that. So maybe one way to think about philosophy is like some people describe philosophy as learning how to die or helping you sort of prepare for the struggles of existence in all sorts of ways. And maybe philosophy helps you develop a certain awareness of what is a problem and what is not a problem, right? I
Mm.
think that is a good way to think about what a lot of philosophy is because philosophers take themselves to ask questions that are often viewed as kind of trivial or often just suppressed, right? The reason though they care about those questions is because they see a problem that other people don't see, right? So yeah, why should you want to build your own worldview? Because there might be problems you're not seeing in your own life, right? And if they are there, you would want to kind of get out ahead of them and understand them. Now, of course, this can go to an extreme where people do cause themselves all sorts of problems that are unnecessary, right? They might become obsessive. They might become consumed by a question that is impossible to answer or something, right? So, philosophy can be dangerous as well, of course, just like anything, right? But what I'm really articulating through my work is getting people to use philosophy as much as they need philosophy to benefit them, right? I'm not trying to like convert people into these, academic philosophers or people who obsess over certain abstract puzzles, right? It's really to
Mhm.
use philosophy as a tool, is to develop your own relationship to the tools of philosophy in this like democratic way where, you don't need a degree to do this stuff, right? It's something that anyone can do if it serves them.
So if someone is listening to this now and they're like, okay, I want to have a new relationship with philosophy, I want to start developing that. What would you say to them? Like, where do they start? They might be thinking, I gotta start thinking through all these crazy existential problems. Like, what is God? What is the meaning of the universe? Like, do you start there or do you start somewhere else?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, the first thought that came to mind is that you already have had many philosophical thoughts, right? So what I would say is you should not start by like thinking that you need to go take a course at a university or something to start learning philosophy. I think you already are a philosopher. So you start by acknowledging that you already have beliefs about these sorts of things. And your first task is to just figure out what I would call your intellectual coordinates. Like out of all the possible things you could think and about reality, like, what are the things you've already thought about? Kind of where are you in what's called logical space, right? If you were born in the United States and you were raised as a Christian, and you only speak English and, you've never been to India or something, you probably have not thought about Hinduism very much, right? And I haven't, I'm learning Hinduism right now. Um, the point there is you exist somewhere in this world of ideas. You have a sort of coordinates. And within that kind of country that you're in, right, within your own head and your own personal life, you've had a whole history of philosophical thoughts to yourself, right? And you may
Mhm.
have debated philosophy with people, at the bar, whatever, like, debated ethics and morality and whether a hot dog is a sandwich, right?
Yeah.
That's a big one. So, the point there is like, first of all, realize that you already are doing it all the time and become aware that you've already done it a lot. That's where I think you should start and try to articulate kind of what you've already done and become aware of that so then you can start to integrate like new information into what's already there. Because if you just start kind of taking this role of a student, like I'm just going to learn, what Plato said. I'm going to read all of Plato. This is like a common thing people do. Like, I'm going to read all of Nietzsche. I'm going to become a master of someone else's thought, right? What ends up happening is you'll spend 5 years doing that and you're just not developing your own muscle as a philosopher. And you're not really doing what you've been doing, which is like thinking for yourself, right? You can easily just fall into this like passive consumer of knowledge role, which is really the antithesis of philosophy, in my opinion.
Mhm. Kenton asks or says something really interesting in the chat. He says, you can plug the things you've thought about into an LLM and ask what school of thought yours lines up with and go from there. Do you recommend people use AI in their personal philosophy, like micro philosophy process, or do you think they should do it without it?
Yeah, this is good because for this, we haven't even started building my philosophy yet. So I knew there would be like a huge I knew there would be a huge conversation before I
Yeah.
actually write anything down, and I might not even do it this time. But I knew I would have to also address AI because I actually came to my insight with the help of AI. So I have been plugging into AI my own questions and thoughts as I've been researching Heidegger and Hindu philosophy. And it was actually really helpful for helping me discover what's already out there. So basically, I had a hunch, right? My hunch was it was kind of realization, right? That no one has combined Heidegger's existential phenomenology with non-dual philosophy. And I was like, does that make any sense? Like, is that even a thing, right? Is that a thing? Has someone done that before? I put that into AI and I spent over an hour and a half asking it questions, teasing out this idea. And it was amazing. Like it helped me learn about researchers I've never heard about before because they're not mainstream. It helped me find like books that I need to read to develop my own line of thinking. So, AI is great for raising your awareness about what's out there on the internet, for answering your basic questions, for giving you a quick summary of, someone's thinking. You still need to do the work yourself eventually because the point again is to write your own music, not to just say, "Hey AI, produce an emo EDM track for me." Right? It's like if your insight was
Yeah.
no one has combined emo music and EDM, I'm just gonna have AI write that for me. That defeats the point because the process is what gives you the benefits. So
Yeah.
yeah, I do recommend using AI. I'm curious how, Taylin, you have used AI and whether it's different than what I described.
It's very similar, and I agree with you. I was thinking through the other day how there's like even for writing, because a lot of times we explore philosophy through writing. There's like writing as product and writing as process. And when you're writing to create a product, it's like copywriting. You just want like good copywriting. You don't overly care how you get there. But writing as process is where the product becomes the person. I think philosophy is very similar. Like it's in the process of exploring philosophy that you shape yourself. So for me, I don't go and like read books and then go to AI and say, what philosophers do I align with? I personally just like to go to the gym or go on a walk and then speak into an AI project that I created. And I'll say, okay, here's everything I can think about metaphysics. This is what I believe, what I think I believe. Here's the reasons. And it'll just like let me ramble for like 20, 30 minutes. And then it moves into what's called a stage 2. And it says, okay, here's your core axioms. Here's the ones that are strong and you actually have good evidence for. Here's the ones that are weak. Here's the ones that are terrible and you don't have any evidence for, but you think you do. And then it will ask me questions like, okay, on these tensions, what is it that, could you strengthen these arguments? Have you thought them through? And it will like ask me questions to try to strengthen them. And that process has been one of the most like intellectually satisfying processes ever, because it's me engaging with the ideas. It's not AI saying, oh, there's a tension here, but here's the solution. It's like, this doesn't actually make sense here and here and here. What do you think about that? Like, how would you rectify that tension? That I'm like sitting there like, okay, well, actually, yeah, I never thought about that. And it's through hours and hours and hours of doing this that I feel like I've started to develop more of my personal philosophy and myself as a person. And AI has been a huge accelerant of that. Like before AI, my worldview project was a mess, man. Like it was just a gong show of all these ideas. I'm like, oh, I need to go through it and I need to like sort it. AI's pattern recognition is so strong. It's just like, these things don't make sense together. These don't, these don't, these don't. Here's all like the errors. It doesn't catch everything, but it catches enough of the big stuff that I feel like I've been able to create a more cohesive worldview quicker with the help of AI.
Yeah, so I think it's great for, and someone says here in the chat, coherence. I think it is great for that. I would be skeptical about its evaluative judgments. Like, I think sometimes those are accurate, but as a philosopher who has read a lot of philosophical arguments and understands like the nuance that goes into evaluating arguments,
Mhm.
I think the evaluation of arguments is such a subtle kind of human intuitive judgment sort of thing that AI
Mhm.
is not going to replicate that very well. But I do think if you were testing your ideas for internal coherence, it would be very good at that, right? You said this, but you also said this other thing. Those two things contradict, right? I think
Yeah.
that is like super valuable on its own. I mean, that will get you pretty far, just like
Yeah.
ironing out the major inconsistencies. But the kind of assessment of strength and weakness, like I feel like that could be kind of wonky. Like I would not trust that.
Interesting.
Um, but I guess it could tell you whether you have the way you put it was like, have you provided like any evidence, right? It could tell you
Mhm.
that you have failed to justify a claim. But I would push back on whether it could truly evaluate like any claim as strong or weak, unless maybe you trained
Mm.
it in a
Mhm.
very specific way. So this is a kind of big problem in philosophy too, is it's not always clear what the meta rules are for evaluating different positions against each other.
Mhm.
It's one of the weirdest things in academic philosophy, right? It's like you could go to a talk or a seminar, someone gives a very sophisticated argument, people don't like it in the audience, and it's just not clear like who the judge is, right? According to what standards can we assess like the plausibility of something, right? I mean, that's a kind of
Right.
meta philosophical problem. I don't think AI is going to be able to help with that, and that's fine. Like it doesn't need to.
That I've never thought about it like that. But I think I'm going to go back to my AI prompt now and be like, okay, look for coherences and justifications and things like that. Like what you remind me of is I have a tendency to just make like crazy leaps. Like if this is true, then this must be true, then this, then this, then this, then this. And AI will be like, you have an assumption that the first thing is true, and you've if then 5 times up, and the one on the fifth is probably not even true anymore. Like you're so far off the initial assumption. Reel it back in, and I'm like, oh, I didn't even realize that I did that. So it actually made me aware of some of my like thought processes like that, where it's like you're getting way too shaky because you don't even have evidence for the first claim, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, no, that makes sense. So, maybe we should try to pivot a little bit at this 57-minute mark. This was a lot of great kind of setup, but maybe we
Yep.
should try to start thinking about together, right? How would we start building a philosophy, right? So you already have your worldview, right? You have is it an obsidian knowledge base, you said?
Mine is a compilation of Word documents. There's like 20 of them or something like that.
20 Word documents. And what would you say? It's like 80 pages or 100 pages? What?
Each document is probably like 20 to 50 pages. So
Okay.
they're split into topics. It's like metaphysics,
Mm.
spirituality, ideas, way of life, like things like that.
So this is a couple hundred pages.
Yeah, maybe like 300 if I had to guess.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. So you basically have a book written, right? And then the way that you approach that, would you say you had any kind of system? You split it into subfields or topics, but were these just kind of notes that you took while, walking, or was there some kind of systematic approach from the beginning?
Well, first I separated it into subfields. So it was I can't quite remember what it was. It was like spirituality, and in there it had other like subfields as well. It was like death, consciousness, nature of reality, the creation myth, or like whatever you believe creation was. And then it had like a social component. It was like ethics, morality, relationships. And I just tried to think what are all of the core sub ones. And I think I had AI help me with this. And then when it came to filling them in, I took the Nassim Taleb approach where I told myself if I have to research to fill something in, then I'm not ready to write it yet and explore it. Like that needs to be something I'm more just exploring ideas for fun, not like I'm researching looking for an answer. It has to be more curiosity driven for me. And then as for like which ones I explored in what order, I would just go for a walk and say, "Oh, I feel like I've been thinking through metaphysics for like a year and a half,
Yeah.
and exploring it. I feel like I'm ready to get it all down and start to refine it." And then I would just speak it into AI in a Claude project for like 30 minutes, just everything, just speak, 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 speak. Because I prefer to speak than write. And then that's when AI would look for the incoherences and the tension and the justifications, and it would start to like ask me questions to refine it. And then at the end, once everything was refined to the point where I'm like, I don't have answers for the working tensions anymore, I would have to go explore those further. Then it would compile all of that into a document. And then the next time I go to do it, I open up that document and I go through it like from the very top all the way to the bottom. I'm like, actually, like I would say this differently. This is incorrect. I now have an answer for this tension. And it's just like a process of continuously working through it over and over again.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So much to say there. A few things I just wanted to highlight. This idea that if you can't write about it, then you're not ready. Like if you have to go read a book, right? If you have to go regurgitate what someone else said. Oh, how did this guy put it? Let me go back to my notes and build off of what he said, right? I think that's really critical for this whole project. If I were to sit down right now and try to write my philosophy out, this insight that I had, right? I would not feel very good about that. I feel like I would get stuck. But you have to find where you get stuck, I think.
Yeah.
And you might get stuck within 5 minutes. Like I might open up a document on this call and try to start explaining something I was thinking about the other day, and I might write 2 sentences and realize, "Yeah, I'm stuck. Like I don't know how to explain this, right?" That means that I'm not ready yet, right? I need to maybe talk it out. And I love this idea of talking to AI. I think it's super underrated. Like just recording audio recording on your iPhone or directly into the LLM, you can do 30 minutes, 45 minutes, right? Feed that into the AI, have it organize your thoughts for you. I actually did this with the micro philosophy stuff a lot while driving. I would just talk out different views about values
Oh,
and so on. So,
that's good.
um, yeah, I think that's a great way to like break through the stuckness, right? Instead of just like turning to reading more books. Now, I've struggled with this because I've turned to read more books. That's how I get through the stuckness.
Mm.
So that's part of why I'm doing this, right? I'm trying to do it myself, right? You reach the limit, and going back to the music example, right? You might try to write a song and you realize like I only know 4 chords and like I just keep
Mhm.
playing the same chord progression over and over because I just am stuck creatively, right? Well, you have to like break that. You have to loosen up. And yeah, maybe you do go like listen to something else or learn a new song and come back. But at the end of the day, like you need to do the work of breaking through that barrier which is there and then allowing yourself to like overcome that fear and, just produce. So, I think it's great that you used walking and talking to do that. Um, I encourage people to do the same thing. Just like talk out loud about philosophy and realize where you get stuck.
It makes me wonder. So, with you and like all the education you have around philosophy, how would you approach the worldview construction process? I just did it wild, wild west. Like I was just like, what do I think about this thing? But I'm like really curious into how you would go about it as someone who's studied so many schools of thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would approach it more systematically, but I don't think that's a
Mhm.
good thing necessarily.
How
Right.
come? How so?
So my plan for this series of live calls was to, yeah, like develop this systematic approach to articulate this existential non-dual philosophy that I've been thinking about.
Mhm.
Um, and I would probably start with like metaphysics because I have some view that like metaphysics is the foundational subfield of philosophy. So I'd probably start articulating like my core metaphysical belief and eventually try to work my way to ethics because ultimately I think that to have a complete philosophy you need to have an ethics. So yeah, I would start with these like
How come you would? Two questions.
yeah.
Why is metaphysics so foundational? And then why do you need the ethics piece?
So good. I don't think you can have an ethics without a metaphysics. So, everyone exists in the world. And if you're building a philosophy, I think you need to have a view about what the world is. What is it like? Right? What would it even mean for you to have a philosophy that does not implicitly or explicitly have some kind of view of the world, right? So
Mhm.
basically, I just think it's indispensable. Like you can have a philosophical theory about something very specific like art or politics, right? But what we're talking about here is building a complete philosophy of life, right? So if that's your goal, a complete philosophy, then you need to situate yourself in relation to the world. Are you separate from nature in some sense? Are you identical with it and so on, right? All the great world religions and philosophies have a metaphysics that grounds them. Do you need an ethics? Well, I mean, it goes back to what you asked me earlier. If you didn't have a personal ethics, what would you have? You could just follow like social conventions, I guess. And that would be fine for
Mhm.
most people. You would get by. Um, and if you're okay with that, that's your choice. But at the end of the day, if you're someone who wants to build a personal philosophy, ultimately, I would think you're interested in developing your answers to these big moral questions. Like, what sort of person do I want
Mhm.
to be? Which things are good or bad? What's good or bad for me? Right? Are you going to decide for yourself what's good or bad for you, or is someone else going to decide that? Right. So, yeah, I
Got it.
think you need an ethics if the goal of this is to live it. So, I think you need both of those things. So, I would approach it um, with a kind of structure built into it. Now, of course, you have that structure has emerged for you just through, like, the volume of talking about these different questions, right? You listed a bunch of different big philosophical questions. You shared a bunch of thoughts about it, and it kinda naturally developed a structure. And I think for some people, that is a good approach, especially if you're more, like a creative type, I would say. Whereas, like, an axiomatic approach for other people will serve them better, right? They might wanna start with first principles and
Mhm.
deduce results from that. So,
Yeah,
um, I think, yeah, how you approach it will come down to kind of whatever gets the job done, in my opinion. And maybe that this is useful to mention that there is no correct approach, right? Philosophy does not have a sort of answer to that question.
right.
And that's really important because I think what creates friction for some people will be worrying about, and you probably felt this too, worrying about whether you're doing it right. Like,
For
am
sure.
I am I just a not who's a non-trained philosopher? Am I building my philosophy like a fool? Or
Yeah.
um, let me turn a light on. It's getting super dark in here.
No worries. You've got you're in the cave. What is it? Plato's allegory of the cave. You're just in the cave right now.
Well, I just discovered the sun, and so now I have knowledge entering my
Yeah.
mind. Um, no, I got so carried away, I just, like, didn't realize the sun is going down. But, yeah, what do you think about that idea that it's really depends on whatever gets the job done? There is no sort of meta answer.
Well, I do like it because if someone is overwhelmed with starting, it's like just start. Like just see where it takes you. Even if you don't have the most cohesive worldview and it's like a total mess, even the process of like getting in the pool is going to be more valuable than not doing it at all. And a few things that you said that actually did align with my process is I did try thinking from first principles for a lot of the development, and I started with metaphysics because my mind thought if I don't understand the meta structure or the biggest picture, I can't do the stuff inside it. It's like how do I figure out what goes in the box if I don't even have a box? But I also was insecure about that because I'm like metaphysics is maybe the least practical side. Like I'd be writing stuff for my Substack and thinking, what do I write about this week? I need something practical. Well, in my private time, I'm just exploring fucking metaphysics. I'm like, what do I write about metaphysics on my Substack? I have never tried that before. But then I slowly was like, well, the stuff inside of it got easier as I felt like I understood my view of the container and what created the container. So I felt like it was actually the right move. And to hear you say that you would start with metaphysics, I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not crazy after all for not starting practical and then going up.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I really think that if you look at how people, who are creatives, like artists, like visual artists and so on, like, how they approach their work, right? You're gonna find a wide variety of methods. Some people have an idea ahead of time, right? And then they try to just, like, fit this form which already exists. Other people just discover the form from the inside out or whatever.
Mhm.
So, I guess non-professional philosophers would think that there is some kind of correct approach, just as people who are trying to write a song will always ask Paul McCartney, like, "How do you write a song?" You know what I mean? They're trying to just search for
Yeah.
this formula, but there is no philosophy does not have an answer. That's why philosophers themselves have produced all sorts of different approaches, right? Um, So, yeah, getting started is the hardest part and overcoming the fear. I think the fear is huge for me and for you and for everyone, right? It's like, is the approach I'm taking too scary? Or is it something that I can
Yeah.
like build enough momentum with to where I can eventually, start to overcome these puzzles and challenges? Right? If I were to start right now with a kind of axiomatic approach, I would be crippled by fear because I would not know which axiom to start with, and then I would put something down, and then I would, realize, this is not the right axiom. So, um, I don't think that's a good way to do it unless you kind of already know what you're trying to build. And some people do, like Aristotle, maybe he saw the big picture in some grand vision and he could just like create all the axioms and they worked pretty well, right?
Yeah.
Spinoza famously in his book The Ethics used a geometrical method to deduce all of his conclusions, right? But sometimes philosophers do this after. And this is interesting for you, Taylin. A lot of philosophers, Kant too, they would write the whole thing one way and then turn it into an axiomatic system after, because they've done the kind of creative exploratory work and then they can
Mhm.
see now how to reorganize it and see which things are more important than others, right? And see what the shape of the box
Right.
is. So yeah, maybe I think we've kind of agreed that there are many ways to do this. Whatever gets the job done, you just have to do it, but it's very unlikely that you're going to have this sort of end product worked out before you do the actual thing, right?
Yes.
And
I would agree.
this just sounds like any other process, like creative, writing, music, whatever. So there's
I
nothing
agree.
special about philosophy, I think, that should be treated differently than writing or and this connects with a lot of my work, which is like I think the academy and for some reason the culture of philosophy has made it seem different than other things. But it really is similar to someone who's just gonna like start writing to learn more about themselves or about the world, right?
Man, there's like a million directions I could go with this, but I I think I'm gonna go in this direction. Are you open to now starting to explore your metaphysical position? So instead of us talking abstractly, we can start like pulling your worldview apart, and we can see what it is. Is that where you want to
Yeah, we should probably do that a little bit because that was what I thought we would be doing. We are at an hour
go?
and 15 minutes, so I do have dinner reservations at 8:30, but I'm happy to start doing that. Let me share my screen real quick.
Cool.
So I have been learning recently about non-dual philosophy, and
For those who don't know, what is that?
yeah, well, it's a good question because for a long time I was someone who didn't know. I was trained as an analytic philosopher. Let me just start with what I know, and then I'll try to explain non-dual. I was trained as an analytic philosopher, which basically is a tradition of philosophy that really emerged in the 20th century in the UK and Western Europe. And today it's practiced in the US, UK, Australia, all over the world, right? And this was a style of philosophy that was focused on logical argument and the analysis of language, pretty much. Right. So this kind of philosophy is very scientific, technical, right? It's trying to use rigorous logical argumentation to uncover these deeper truths, solve these philosophical questions, and so on. Now, people who are trained in this tradition, they, for the most part, never read anything from what's called Eastern. I put quotes there. People disagree with Eastern as a term for good reasons,
Yeah.
right? Eastern philosophy, Hinduism, Buddhism, etc., Jainism, Taoism, right? So people like me, for most of our philosophy education, didn't know anything about any of these traditions. Now, of
Mhm.
course, lots of people who are non-trained philosophers, are interested in these things and research them on their own. People like Alan Watts popularized them in the U.S. Some of these schools of thought, like Hinduism, are especially what's called Advaita Vedanta, are considered non-dual, right? Non-dual. What does that mean? Well, basically, there is no separation between subject and object. That's one way to put it. There's no real distinction between self and object, right? Between you and the world. Between you and the world.
Mm. So for a beginner, because subject object is something I feel I kind of get, but I have to really like think about it. I'm like, what is
Ooh.
that really? Like what is can you define that?
Yeah, yeah, no, this is good because like to me that's just something I would skip over explaining, right? So this is like
Yeah.
exactly why I want to do these live calls, like for questions like this. Um Good. So there's a lot of stuff you could mean. First thing to say is like people use this kind of in a general way, a loose way. So it doesn't always have a very specific definition. But one thing you might mean by this is like the self versus the world or something, or the ego versus the world, right? The subject could
Mm.
refer to the subjective experiencer of objects. So in Descartes' philosophy, right, he thinks that you are what he calls a thinking thing. And basically, the way
Mm.
that you engage with reality is through appearances. Appearances. So Descartes thinks you are a thinking thing. You are this sort of receptacle of the external world of appearances that present themselves to this subjective experience, and the world sort of represents itself to you through appearances. Um, all right, so if you had an object like a table, the you are not the table on dualistic thinking, right? The table is a separate object from you, and the way that you relate to the table is through your sense perceptions and ultimately your kind of appearance of the table in your mind. So that would be dualism, Cartesian dualism. Um, Another way to put it another way Descartes puts it is that mind and matter are basically separate substances or things which exist.
So does this mean that Descartes actually was he did not believe in non-dual thinking? Like that didn't fit his model of reality?
Yep, exactly. So Descartes is famously a dualist. I'm just drawing a contrast here.
Yeah.
So he does believe that there is a separation between subject and object because he thinks that your mind is a separate kind of thing from the objects outside of your mind. So he's a dualist because there's two things. There's you and there's the table, right?
Yeah.
So on non-dual philosophy, you are the table. This is like yeah, this is why the analytic philosophers don't read this stuff because it sounds, crazy. You are the table. And the only reason is this easy to read, by the way? Should I zoom in?
If you zoom in a little bit more, it'll be
Okay.
good. I'm on a pretty big monitor, but it's not too bad.
The
That's
only
perfect.
reason you think that you are not the table is false beliefs, right? So
Yeah.
you what they would call Maya. I think that's the right spelling, right? You are actually the table,
Mhm.
and people think the table is separate from them because of illusions or false beliefs about the nature of reality. That's the basic non-dual position as far as I understand it. And also
Um,
you are the world or what they call Brahman. Like you are
yeah.
everything. Yeah.
Makes me it's almost like you have to reconceptualize what you and I would mean in this analogy.
Right. So here's a case where language is what causes the illusion.
Yeah.
So why do we think that we're separate from reality because a lot of people use language as the means by which they take themselves to know the world or the way they represent the world to themselves. So in this case, right, the grammar of our language builds in a sort of subject and object, right? So I agree
Yeah.
with you that on non-dual thinking, you should view language as an obstacle to true understanding.
Kenton asks a really good question. In your conception of non dual, is there a ground to matter and mind like nothingness, or is there no split anywhere?
Good. Is there a ground to matter and mind? So, as far as I understand it, and this is coming, by the way, from a podcast that I listened to from Alex O'Connor, who
Yeah.
interviewed, I don't know his name, but a Swami, which is like a teacher of what's called Advaita Vedanta. According to
Mhm.
my understanding of that podcast, which I was listening to the other day, reality is infinite being. There is nothing it can be reduced to. It is this sort of infinite existence. So there is no single ground, I guess.
Yeah. This it reminds me of a way that I've heard it explained where it's like nothingness is just infinite potential. So all of reality is one substance, but it tricks itself into experiencing itself by splitting itself. So I think of a piece of paper, like a piece of paper is infinite potential. You actually could draw anything. And the way that you draw something is not by adding to the paper, it's by dividing it.
Oh, so like a line would be dividing that. Okay.
Like if you drew a tree, you'd actually be like dividing the infinite potential to create like distinctions on it. That's like one way to conceptualize it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, but it would be incorrect to think of it as a substance. So like substance is a
Mm.
technical term.
Mhm.
This is actually gets into the Heidegger's critique and some of why I've been led to this. Heidegger basically thinks that Western metaphysics is based on Aristotle's idea of substance. Based on Aristotle's idea of substance, which is
Mhm.
his view that reality is made out of fundamental entities called substance, which for him were living things like you and I. So Aristotle's view was that the world depends upon these foundational entities, substances, right? And these are actually distinct things. Like you and I are distinct substances. Um, and that this creates dualism. This
Mm.
creates separation of subject and object because, you're a substance, I'm a substance, we're not the same substance. So this is kind of what led me from Heidegger to non-dual thinking. Heidegger wants to argue that what what it means to exist or to have being is not to understand yourself as a substance or the world, right? Or the world as a substance. So materialism understands the world in terms of matter and physical substances, right?
Mhm.
Atoms and so on. So Heidegger was interested in this question, what does it mean to exist or to have being? And he concluded that this substance approach um, commits you to dualism, and that's actually a misunderstanding of what being is. For him, being is not to have being is not to be a thing. is not to be an object or a thing,
Mhm.
right? So that's the key one of the key insights is that he's arguing that what does it mean for you to be or to exist? It's not for you to be like a table. You're not like a substance, a thing in the world, right? You're more like a process.
Kinda like Alan Watts' analogy of you're the wave that, like, comes up and crashes back into the ocean. It's like a moving, evolving thing.
Yes, but here's now this is where I'm starting to do some like actual research of my own. I
Mhm.
think that the wave explanation of Buddhism, so some people explain Buddhism as saying like there is no self, you're like a wave, part of the ocean, right?
Yeah.
I think that I'm not sure if this assumes that there is a thing called the wave, like there is an ocean, a substance, the wave, and you're like a part of it. So I am kind of stuck here with Buddhist metaphysics. Do they think there is do they think the world is a thing? Do they think the world is a thing? And as
Mhm.
far as I understand it, they think actually no, it's nothing. It's nothingness.
Yeah.
But I don't personally understand their view of nothingness well enough to make progress here. So this is somewhere that I'm stuck.
Would you agree with the nothingness if you thought of nothingness as infinite potential?
Potential is an issue for me. Uh,
Mm.
I'm curious what you might mean by that because it kind of has a physics connotation, like potential energy. So yeah, what do you
Yeah.
mean by potential?
The reason I use the word potential is because nothingness implies somethingness, which means it's dual.
Yes, good. So this is good because the way you just articulated nothingness is actually right a kind of dualism because you understand it as in contrast to something.
Yes.
It's opposed to thingness.
This is where I use the word potential because I don't think you can actually use language to describe non-dual. You can only point at it. And if I was to say that there's like reality is nothing, but then people will say, well, it's actually something because things exist. I'm like, well, if you collapse it, you would just say that like nothing and something are the same thing, but like something does exist. So nothingness is just the potential to be anything.
All right. I got distracted after the
Oh,
first
no worries.
sentence you said because I got really excited about something.
Okay,
So
run with it.
yeah, so you said, can we use language to describe non-dual, right?
Right.
This this is the insight I think I had, which is just absolutely mind-blowing to me, if I'm right.
Mhm.
Heidegger's use of language in being and time provides a way for us to describe non-dual thinking or existence, non-dual existence or being, right? So
Interesting.
Heidegger's analysis of being and being in time, as far as I'm understanding it, provides an articulation through language of what the non-dual people are talking about when they're talking about non-dual existence. And this is why it's so fucking hard.
Yeah.
Because he's trying to use language in a way that allows us to avoid slipping back into dualism.
Difficult task. Very difficult.
So, anyways, yeah, I got really excited when you said that because I do think Heidegger is using the tools of analytical philosophy in some sense as a sort of stepping stone to getting us to understand this ineffable feeling or experience that people have when they take themselves to be thinking in a non-dual way. So I think it's actually this like crazy intersection between Western and Eastern philosophy because he's his project is described as what's called phenomenology, and he's
Mhm.
actually
What is that, by the way?
yeah, so phenomenology for Heidegger is analyzing let me how do I put it? Here's how to put it. Phenomenology is for Heidegger this. It's analyzing the meaning of being for us.
Okay.
So this is something he thinks science cannot do. Science can describe the Science can describe the brain and the kind of actions that happen in the brain, which underlie or cause things like consciousness, right? But science cannot articulate what existence means for a subject, what
Mhm.
existence means to a subject. So, what he's doing is using philosophy to get you to understand what it means for you to have being. And my hunch is that what he's describing is the experience that people point to when they're thinking in a non-dual way. He's giving it an
Yeah.
articulation.
Yes. I can track that. It's cool. It's like it reminds me of like no language can explain non-dual. It can only be intuited through direct experience. But that is also one of the things people don't like about the non-dual experience.
Right. So language can be used to get you to be in a position to experience it, but it cannot itself represent it.
Yes. It
That
can point you in the direction. That would be my understanding.
well, think about it this way, like poetry. You can read a poem and it can produce an experience for you. Right. I think it's the same
Yeah.
idea here, right? We can use
Yeah.
language to produce a vision or an experience, but the poem is not like representing some true objective fact and reality in the way that like science does, right? It's just
Right.
a kind of subjective use of language to get you to see things a certain way or to feel something. So the cool thing, and I have to wrap up soon, but this is what I'm
Mhm.
working on now in my next article is whether psychedelics are a shortcut to what Heidegger calls authentic existence or authentic relationship to being. Whether psychedelics are, when used in a certain way, whether they can get us to have the experience that Heidegger's philosophy is trying to get us to see. He's
Hmm.
trying to do it through language and to get you to see that there is this kind of self understanding which you can have about your own existence. And I think the indescribable experience some people have on psychedelics is the thing that Heidegger's trying to describe.
Hmm. Have, have you ever heard of the concept of Douglas Hofstadter's strange loop?
Yes, I heard it through actualize.org, but could you elaborate a bit? Yeah.
It the explanation is basically that any system that can reference itself cannot understand the deepest truths within its own system. So a dictionary where all the words reference one another will eventually reach a contradiction. So you can't explain like the deeper truths of the structure of the thing itself is my understanding. And Hofstadter describes consciousness as a strange loop, at least like human consciousness. Its ability to reference itself and be aware of itself is what causes the subjective experience. And I made a connection that So that would basically create the experience of dualism, is when you activate a strange loop. And psychedelics, like intense fasting, and basically being like really close to death are the only things I can think of that actually would cause the strange loop to shut off. And that's when people tend to say they experience non-dual insights, is because the strange loop broke.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I'm writing about, not through the strange loop framing, but basically
Mhm.
Heidegger thinks authenticity is this understanding of yourself through your own finitude and death. Basically, it's understanding that
Yeah.
you are this sort of bare, groundless, existing thing, not a thing. This groundless existence, which is finite, and you are not your ego, right? So it disables the dualism in your own head. You basically experience yourself as like bare existing, and that is how I understand the non-dual philosophy is you are the world is just that as a whole, and like you are the
Yeah.
same as that. Now here's the difference is Heidegger is often puts it through like individualistic, like he's analyzing like what you are individually, like
Mhm.
you are this groundless free being, and that's what authenticity is for him, right? But the non-dual tradition goes further and says you are the world, and the world is that. The world is like what Heidegger's saying the individual is. And psychedelics or other altered states or fasting, asceticism, etc., they shut off the representational brain, the way that we represent it to the self, and they kind of shut that dualism off. And then we directly experience this kind of groundless being.
Mhm.
Right. So that's
Yeah.
how I'm thinking about it. So that's what I'm trying to build here is a philosophy that takes that metaphysics and explains how ethics is possible with such a worldview. Because most people don't like this because they think that it's non-moral or amoral. But
Yeah.
I personally am interested in building an ethics on top of this metaphysics or out of it that is fundamentally grounded in your sort of reflexive self understanding, like basically viewing others as the same as yourself.
Yeah.
Something like that. Like there is no separation between you and anything, and that can somehow provide objective morality. That's where I'm going with this. But that part is completely
I
not worked out.
well, I was literally creating a worldview document a couple weeks ago on this exact topic of what the ethics would be derived from non-dual. Um, so I would be very curious to hear what your thoughts were and if we arrived at similar conclusions.
Yeah, well, so we are at an hour and 40 minutes somehow. I honestly could keep going
Yeah.
for another 2 hours, but, yeah, we'll have to save the ethics for another time. Alright, how do we conclude this crazy discussion?
Uh, well, I'll just say thanks for having me, man. This was super fun. Seriously, most fun I've had all week. I love this shit.
Yeah, no, I appreciate
Yes.
you coming. I appreciate everyone. I mean, we have 147 people here, and, I apologize that I have not been monitoring the chat. I'm, like, truly just lost in these ideas right now.
Yeah.
But there will be more live sessions, so I plan to do these pretty regularly. I'm gonna invite people. Taylin will be back for sure. Other people who have something interesting to contribute. So yeah, there will be more. I don't know. I'm not gonna put any constraints on this. I don't know what it's gonna look like, where it's gonna lead, but thanks for coming. Hopefully, I can look through the chat after this and see what the questions were and all that. And I'll post the recording as well for anyone who's interested. But that's it for tonight. So I encourage you all to go build your own philosophy and just get started. Like, you take a walk, talk to AI, whatever you need to do. Yeah,
Love it.
thanks everyone.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. And thanks again. This was awesome.
Yeah, take care.
Peace.